So two things are happening in Nigeria's energy industry, but it's actually the same thing, and I think we need to talk about it. And to create some sort of reference for what we're going to talk about, the context here is that a few weeks ago, it emerged that some shadowy NGO based in London called the Center for Information Resilience, which was basically founded by ex-MI6 agents and has a former CIA analyst and a former Department of Homeland Security person sitting on the board, apparently put together a report that categorized voices in Nigeria's information space, apparently based on whether they're perceived to be pro-Western or anti-Western, pro-Kremlin, all sorts of buzzwords. The issues that were used apparently to categorize people as pro-Kremlin or anti-Western or accepted or threats or whatever included issues like whether they're for or against GMOs, whether they're anti-GMO campaigners, whether they're Pan-Africanists, whether they criticize Bill Gates, and whether they criticize Shell. The additional context here is that one of their core, if you like, KPIs is not just to protect what is perceived as the sovereign national interests of the governments that they work for, it's also to protect the commercial interests of the businesses that come from that jurisdiction, which is why Shell was mentioned in that report. Now, bringing that back to what we're talking about today. So on December 6th last year, an appeal court in the UK finally gave permission to two communities in River State, the Ogale and the Bile communities, to go ahead with the lawsuit that they actually instituted in 2015 against Shell. And basically, the point of the lawsuit is that Shell has been responsible for vast amounts of environmental pollution, and these guys can no longer carry out any economic activity on their land. These are fishing communities, and the fish are all dead, right? The water is all polluted, the land is polluted, they can't carry out agriculture. Basically, their entire way of life is over. Their land is worthless, they can't do anything, they just have to leave because of the activities of this international oil company. So obviously, they went to the home jurisdiction of this oil company because Shell is registered in London to sue. Now, here's the twist. In 2017, the High Court in the UK ruled that the communities could not seek redress against Shell in English courts because there was not sufficient evidence that Shell exercised a high degree of oversight, control, or direction over SPDC. And therefore, that even though Shell is the parent company of SPDC, it has no legal liability with regard to the pollution in question here. That was the decision of the court. So, in other words, the judge decided that Shell and Shell Petroleum Development Company are two separate entities. And even though Shell, the entity in London, receives roughly 50% of the revenues coming out of SPDC, which is a subsidiary in Nigeria, the HQ in London exerts no significant control over the subsidiary in Nigeria, which was an absolutely incredible judgment, to say the least, and not for the right reasons. And then in 2018, the appeal court in the UK upheld this ruling, stating that the parent company Shell did not hold a duty of care to the affected community. So basically, whatever Shell did or does in Nigeria is supposed to stay in Nigeria, and it's not supposed to follow it back to London. That's what the UK courts decided. And there's been this back and forth between then and now. Finally, they got the go ahead to start pursuing the lawsuit after 10 years. So this is not a legal victory against Shell per se. This is not a judgment in their favor. This is just preliminary permission confirming that they can actually pursue a lawsuit in the UK. There's still no guarantee that anything is going to come out of it. Why that is important to discuss in this context is that the timing of this decision matches up incredibly well with when this Q3 2024 adaptive country plan research thing was put together by this NGO, specifically naming social media influencers and Twitter users and journalists who are critical of Shell as information threats and potential vectors for foreign information manipulation and interference, apparently by Russia. Which brings us to the second thing, which is that there is a vast amount of oil theft going on in Nigeria. Obviously, that's not headline news, but what is headline news here is that 2 weeks ago, a story was published which showed evidence actually that a French oil tanker is front and center of this oil theft in Nigeria. So this story included location data of this French tanker showing that it had interfered with its transponder. So basically at so and so time, it's showing that it's off the coast of Port Harcourt in Nigeria. Literally 30 minutes later, it's showing that it's off somewhere off the coast of South Korea, at a South Korean port. which is completely impossible. There's a 12,000-kilometer distance between Port Harcourt and Yosu Port in South Korea. It is functionally impossible to travel 12,000 kilometers from Port Harcourt in Nigeria to Yosu Port in South Korea in 30 minutes using an oil tanker which travels at a maximum of 17 knots, which is about 31 kilometers per hour, give or take. I actually did the calculation and you can see the graphic on your screen showing you how long that should actually take. So the final figure you have there is the number of days that journey should take. Supposedly, according to the ship's data, this incredible journey took 30 minutes. So either this French ship has discovered a wormhole off the coast of Port Harcourt, and there's a wormhole on Nigeria's Atlantic coast, which we aren't aware of all this while, or it fiddled with its transponder so as to hide the fact that it was somewhere it shouldn't have been doing something that it shouldn't have been doing. And I think we all know what that thing is. Now, where the story gets deeper is that a few days after that, French state media, Radio France International, RFI, then published an article supposedly decrying oil theft in Nigeria and supposedly calling for action and whatnot. And then casually slipped it into the article that it's the Russians who are responsible for the oil theft. My issue here is not so much with this constant attempt to deflect everything by blaming it on the Russians. My issue is that there's an information war going on against Africa. And one of the ways that this information war is being waged is to convince Africans using funded journalism, using the media, using whatever tools are available, that asking questions of foreign actors from the Western world is something you are not supposed to do, first of all, and that if you do it, then that act in and of itself of questioning them is something wrong, right? It's something that is pseudo-criminalized because apparently it means that you are being mind controlled or funded by the Kremlin. It's become like the dog ate my homework kind of thing now, where Western actors can do absolutely anything they want in Nigeria. So in the case of Shell, pollute Nigerian water, pollute Nigerian soil, destroy Nigerian livelihoods, do absolutely whatever the hell you want. In the case of these French oil interests, come to the coast of Nigeria and basically steal Nigerian oil, brazenly do that, and get away scot-free by blaming it on the Russians. As we know, we're in the middle of an economic war being fought by Europe on Africa, even though we don't think of ourselves as protagonists in that war, but whether we like it or not, we are. But even more than that now, there is an information war with the objective of convincing us that we have absolutely no right to question things that are being done to us by European powers. Because apparently, if you question it, even in the slightest way, then that means that you are being mind controlled by the Russians. So make of that what you will.